How you doing, big fella?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, fed up of the weather, fed up of all the problems, but apart from that, okay.
Fantastic and great to hear from you, Ron. And welcome all to Big Ron Remembers with the only manager that's won the League Cup and the FA Cup with 3 different clubs and all involving Manchester United.
It's ironic, that, isn't it? Yeah.
It certainly is. It certainly is. But tonight, Ron, we're going to be talking about the golden team, the magnificent Magyars, and your memories of that fantastic team and how they shaped football. So before we indulge into the Hungarians, let's briefly look at how that team come together, and one person in particular who was so influential, and that was one of your former coaches, Jimmy Hogan, who was out in Austria when the First World War was declared. He was incarcerated, he was interned, and then he was taken to Hungary, to MTK, and that's where that journey began.
Yeah, apparently, I know that Jimmy was when I got to know Jimmy Hogan when I was a young player at the Villa.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Hogan was brought in as coach for the youth team, or the third team, because all clubs then used to have about 7 teams. And he'd been very influential in the Austrian team that came to Wembley in, I think it's about 1952, got a 2-2 draw at Wembley, if memory serves me right. Had a star player then was an attacking centre half called Ockwork. They called him Ockwork the Clockwork because he was here, there, and everywhere. But of course, then the year later or so, the Hungarian side came over and absolutely hammered England at Wembley, where England had never been beaten by a team outside the British Isles before. Beat us 6-3. And an awful lot of credit was given to Jimmy Hogan from their players, including the legendary Puskas, who actually spoke of Jimmy, and they called him Uncle Jimmy because of the influence he'd had in helping create one of the best. Certainly, I've never seen a better national side than the Hungarians of 53. Brazilians of 70, maybe the Dutch side in the late 70s, but the 53, 54 Hungarians were as good as anything they'd ever.
And with the Brazilians of 1970, I mean, Brazil was a different country, of course it was, to what it is today. And other teams that we've seen, certainly the Dutch of total football, and 1 or 2 other instrumental sides that have been very influential on a European or a South American or a world scale. But these Hungarians, they were working with a backdrop of communist, Stalinist state football, where in 1950 all the football teams, their names were changed and the unions were running them. For instance, Honved, the Kispest team that Puskás played for, became Kispest Honved. MTK changed their name. They all changed colours, and they were almost used, wasn't they, as a propaganda tool by the communists.
Well, yeah, I think the Hungarians first sprang into prominence. I think it was in the 52 Olympics.
Yeah, it was, yeah, absolutely.
And then they came over to play at Wembley. And to be fair, because we didn't know that much about them, we automatically assumed that they go the way of a lot of the so-called foreign super teams did when they came to Wembley. They got battered.
Yeah.
But these were a different kettle of fish. I can remember, I was only a kid then. One of the things that struck me straight at the kickoff, Puskas went up for the kickoff, and while he was just standing around, the ball was at his feet, flicked it up and caught it in his instep. And we've all gone, what was that? Now, most players can do that because he'd shown us something to do.
Yeah.
But then, I don't remember too many players doing that. And they just They absolutely ripped England apart. Puskas was magnificent. And by the way, it was a very, very good England side.
Yeah.
We had some very good players. I mean, Puskas got a great goal when the ball was cut back to him from the right wing, and he sort of dragged back the ball. And Billy Wright, who was a terrific centre half, I think Billy was playing right half or midfield as then wing half. I think Billy's quote was, he sent me that much of a dummy I had to pay to get back in the ground, like, and then he lashed one past Gilmerry Puskas with his left foot, and then they became the sensation. Then we came to recognise them, and then England went over and played them again in Budapest at the Nep Stadium, and got beat 7. And they made one change. I think they dropped the right winger Budai and brought Shandor in. And then, of course, they got kicked out of the World Cup. Sorry, when they say they got kicked out, they played in the World Cup, played in the final against Germany, who they'd already beaten convincingly in the qualifying period. And they played Puskas, who wasn't fit. Took a 2-0 lead, and then somehow the Germany, as they have since had the knack of doing, managed to claw their way back in and beat them. But Hungarians, like the Dutch side of the 70s, never won the World Cup, and yet were probably the best. Well, they were the best team in the world at the time.
And only got beat once in, I think it was 32 games, and that was the World Cup final. And that World Cup final in 1954 was in Bern, it was in Switzerland. The Germans still to this day call it the miracle of Bern. And you're right, Hungary did beat them 8-3 in an earlier game. Germans, to be fair to them, did play a lot of reserve players in that first game because they knew how good the Hungarians were. Puskas, as you rightly say, he got clattered. Puskas missed the rest of the finals until that final. I didn't realise at half time the Germans were injected with something. They say it was vitamins and glucose. Puskas reckons it was something else and went on record to saying that the Germans were doped at half time, and as a result he wouldn't apologise for it. When Real Madrid played in the 1959 European Cup final in Stuttgart, Puskas was not allowed to play in that game.
Do you know what? I didn't realise that.
I didn't
realise that.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, he got his own back the year later then, didn't he?
Didn't he just? But that was at Glasgow, wasn't it, when they beat Eintracht Frankfurt 7-4. Di Stefano scored 3, and Puskas, still to this day, the only player to score 4 goals in the Champions League, or as it was then, the European Cup final. And all this, I've just read actually a magnificent book called The Magical Magyars by David Bailey. And let's just dwell a little bit on when Honved visited Wolverhampton Wanderers, because he does reference a young Ron Atkinson in this book at that game.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what it was. It was a series. Wolves were one of the, along with Man U, were probably the 2 best teams in the 50s in England for a long period. And they were also the pioneers of floodlit football. I mean, that may sound strange to people that take it as commonplace now, but Wolves played a series of floodlit games. They played, I'm trying to think of they played Racing Club of Buenos Aires. They played Spartak Moscow Spartak, I think it was. Yeah. But then they were going to play Honved, which basically, with the exception, I think, of Eddie Guti, was virtually the Hungarian national team that hammered England twice. And I'll tell you how big the Hungarians took it. They had a great left winger called Zibor, who later went to Barcelona. 2 weeks before, Hungary were playing Scotland, and they left him out to save him for that friendly. They left him out of an international game to save him for the friendly. But my part in that was, I was a ground staff boy at the Wolves at the time, and the game was played in December. And it was absolutely bucketing down with rain for days. And the manager, Stan Cullis, had all the skids on the pitch before the game with hose pipes watering the pitch. And it was hammering down while we were doing it. They came out, the Hungarians, who now took on this role of Well, I remember us kids standing by them as they came out, and you're looking at them, and they were like gods. They were like from another planet because we'd seen what they'd done at Wembley and so forth. They came out. They're two up in, I would say, probably from memory, about 10 minutes. I think Kosciusz, who was another great forward player, who also went to Barcelona later. He got a great header, I remember. And they're two up and would have got 10. There is no question. But then all of a sudden, there weren't too many dragbacks coming from Puskás because the ball kept getting stuck in the mud. And Wolves had this powerful way of playing. It was route one, but it was long passing because they had great players. Wolves had great players that could play that way, and they had one of the biggest talents I've ever seen in Peter Broadbent. Peter Broadbent was a magnificent footballer. He could have played in the Hungarian side. He was that good. And then the likes of Billy Wright and Ron Flowers, Bill Slater, and he just powered them out of the game. 1-3-2. I think Roy Swinburne got a couple. 1-3-2. 60,000 in Molineux. And the day after, Desmond Hackett, who was a well-known Daily Express writer, wrote headlines, Wolves, floodlit champions of the world. And, it's still my belief that was the inspiration. Those games gave somebody the thought, a French guy, I can't recall the guy's name, the French guy, who thought we should make this a competition. And that's how the European Cup started in my book. Because of those floodlit friendlies.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ron, and again, I didn't realise that before Wolverhampton Wanderers had played Honved, West Bromwich Albion played them in Belgium, didn't they?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Wolves got annoyed because Vic Buckingham was the manager of West Bromwich Albion because they'd won the FA Cup. So they were invited to play Honved in Brussels. They actually were 3-1 up. Johnny Nichols scored a couple and Ronnie Allen. Yeah. And then the Hungarians went into overdrive and beat them 5-3. Well, Wolves weren't very happy because the Albion had only won the FA Cup. Wolverhampton Wanderers had won the league, so invited them down. And you're right, the Parisian press then said after the English were crowing, let's have a competition to see who the best club side in the world is, and that was the start of the European Cup, and Madrid went on and won the first 5 trophies, didn't they?
Yeah. I can remember. I think one of the first ones I ever saw was they wrong, and they 4-1 us on a 9-inch television. We used to watch those matches on. But it's ironic that probably the revolution. When was I think
56?
Yeah. And I think that was, the whole team broke up. I mean, Puskás went to Real Madrid. I think Kosciusz and Zibor. I don't know if anybody else went to Barcelona. And Wolves actually signed a young Hungarian player. I think his name was Shanda Kosciusz, something like that.
Yeah.
But he'd been captain of the Hungarian youth team, but he never really made it at much. He never really. I know Birmingham City at one time, there was a lot of talk about them signing the right winger that played in the second game, in the 7-1 game, a guy named Shandor.
Yeah.
I always remember a lot of talk about Birmingham going to sign him, but they never did. But that great team broke up because of the revolution in 56.
And that was the October of 1956. And while that revolution was going on, they were out on tour because they got a game against Atletico Bilbao in the European Cup, and they didn't come back. And Bela Gutman, one of the instrumental Hungarian coaches, got hold of Honved, and they organised a tour of Italy, and then they organised a tour of Brazil. So the Hungarians were earning a bit of money, and as a consequence of the 3 players going to Barcelona and Madrid, they all got banned, and they were given that they had to face the consequence of going back to Hungary to the families or staying out. And what happened certainly with Puskás, with Kosciusz and Zibor, they got the family out, And it wasn't just a taxi ride to the border of Austria. It was an unbelievably horrible journey where the wives
Yeah.
had to walk with babies for miles in the mud to get out. So once they were out, it was, shall we go back? And it must have been such a decision for them Hungarians, and that's why a lot of them did go back to Hungary, because they'd
Yeah.
still got family inside Hungary, and they're frightened of what was going to happen to them with the regime.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't remember too many of the others going out and playing elsewhere.
No, they didn't. They
You
all
know,
pretty much all went back.
yeah. I mean, like people, I think Guti was in the army team anyway. I think
He was in the police team. He was in the MTK team. Idikuti was.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was in the other team.
So, but oh, you know, I know you think back, everything seemed. When you think back, you think, did they ever misplace a pass or anything like that? I mean, they came to Wembley, and I think they scored in about the first minute.
Yeah, 45 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden we thought, oh, are they? Because England scored 3 that day.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
You know, England got 3 against them, but you know, you just couldn't. We just couldn't get near them, and they probably, because of how it all finished up, didn't get anything like the credit that they probably deserved. I mean, Brazil in '70 were a brilliant, flamboyant side to watch.
Yeah.
You know, with quite a few worldies in the team, including maybe one of the, if not the best player of all time. And the Dutch, I thought the Dutch side of 74, 78
Yeah.
was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. All right, people might talk about the Spanish Barcelona thing in the noughties, if you like, but for me, no, there was never a better national side than Hungary.
And that goal from Puskas still has to go down as one of the greatest goals ever scored, not just at Wembley Stadium, but in the history of football, doesn't it?
Well, it go memorable,
Yeah.
because he did something then.
Yeah.
He showed a skill, an art that we hadn't seen much of before. Probably in England, if the same situation had arisen, one of our better players would have, you know, tried to hit it in right-footed. But he had the confidence. Mind you, people said it was only because he was one-footed. I said, yeah, we're half a footed. You know, I can still see him just dragging the ball back as Billy went sliding past, opening up his body and then whacking it. I was somewhere when he walked. Oh, I tell you what, when I was manager of Coventry,
Yeah.
for some reason, Puskas came into our dressing room.
Wow.
He came. I don't know what he was doing there. He'd been doing something. He came in the dressing room, and I saw him as well in Survey. Remember the night in the World Cup in '82 when Battison got smashed by
Schumacher.
Yeah. Well, it was that night before that game. He walked into a hotel, and there was a lot of big names in the hotel, and his very presence. I mean, because to look at, he wasn't the most flattering figure to look at later on in life, but he walked in, and you could sense an aura about him. And as I say, he came into our dressing room once at Coventry, and I still to this day don't know what he was doing in there, but probably thought, having seen us play, he'd have got a game. But no, he had this great presence and a great aura. And when people start talking about the all-time greats, you know, and they start, you know, obviously Pele, Maradona, the 2 that are knocking about now, Ronaldo, Messi, people like that. Puskas comes into that category. You know, I mean, he's probably the one you think, a bit. Cruyff and him, yeah, they were in. Puskas could be talked about in the same breath as any player that ever played the game.
I was watching because on YouTube's great. You can look at little clips, and Bobby Charlton was with Puskas, and it was when Pele scored his 1000th goal, and he turned around at Puskas and said, "Isn't that great? Pele's just scored his 1000th goal." And Puskas turned to Bobby Charlton and said, "I scored mine 6 years ago." But you're right. I mean, his goal scoring record just for Hungary alone was 84 goals in 85 games.
I mean, the other thing, of course, he must be. I'm trying to think offhand whether Messi or Ronaldo may have done it. I doubt it. He might be the only player to get a hat trick in two
Yeah,
European Cup finals as well.
yeah, he did, because he scored three against Benfica a couple of
Yeah,
years after, didn't he?
yeah.
I'm sure he's the only one that has scored two hat tricks. Because again,
Well,
hat trick in any game's one hell of a feat, but to score them in a European Cup final is
yeah.
just different. So where do you think history and football connoisseurs, where do we place Puskas and Hungary? They have got to be at the very top table, haven't they?
Well, like I said, I
Yeah,
would say the three best national sides I've ever seen would be. In fact, I'd narrow it down to two. I'd say Brazil of '70
yeah.
and them and the Hungarians, with the Dutch team just a shade below them.
And
Just a shade below them.
what we have to bear in mind as well, Ron, is one of the great Hungarians defected in 1949, Laszlo Kubala.
Oh
They
yeah, he
could
went
have been,
every. He,
they could have been
I
even
tell
better.
you what, he played. How many? I think he got about three. I think he got played for three different countries as well.
Yeah, he did.
Ladislav.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can remember him taking a penalty where he bent down as if he was just going to pick the ball up and hit and knocking it in the net early against somebody. Now I don't know. Did he play for Austria against England? I
he
wonder if he.
he played for.
I know he played against Birmingham in the
He
what
did.
was the old Intercities
Yeah,
Fairs European Butchers and the Candlestick Makers Cup. But I can remember him doing a thing on a penalty somewhere at the back of my mind where he bent down as if he was going to place the ball. It was already on the spot, and the keeper just relaxed and he just flicked it past the keeper. Keeper weren't expecting it.
because he played for Czechoslovakia, because he was Slovak by birth, his parents. He then played for Hungary. I think he
Played for
played.
Austria, didn't he? He
No,
played for Austria.
no, played for Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
6 games. He played 4 games for Hungary, and then Kabala was allowed to play for Spain, and he
Oh yeah,
also
yeah,
played for Catalonia as
yeah,
well as
yeah.
the rest of the world. So, I mean,
Because I used to have a laugh sometimes in training. I'm going to say, do a Kubala sometimes. And they'd all look at me, some of the players, it was Kubala. Mike Summerby, if I see Mike Summerby to this day, he always goes, oh, here comes Kubala. Because I always used to be on about him.
and again, for those that don't know who Kabala was, he was the guy that played for Barcelona, transformed Barcelona, and it was pretty much Kabala's influence that they moved out of their ground to the Camp Nou.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
he
Yeah,
was he was that big a name, and again, he was banned for a year because he defected from
yeah,
Hungary.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's some great stories there. Yeah. So a whole host of great players, but because we didn't have blanket television and anything like that,
Yeah,
we were these people were coming in to play against us, and you think, who are they? And then when you saw them, you thought, well, they can play.
and that was pretty much how Puskas was looked at, wasn't he? When he played for Hungary
Yeah,
against England, they looked at him and, hey, who's this fat lad? And it was the
yeah,
same as when he signed. He was 31 when he signed for Real Madrid, and Santiago Bernabeu didn't want to sign him because he looked fat. I mean,
yeah,
even Di Stefano said he's carrying a bit of timber. They called him Pancho at Real Madrid. But
yeah,
but what a player! And
yeah,
you're right, has to go down as one of the greats of all time. And he's buried in a in Hungary, where only the top echelons of society
yeah,
can lie and be remembered. That's how fantastic Puskás is. And I think if you asked any person, certainly of a certain age, about Hungary, the first person that they would say would be Ferenc Puskás.
And you know his nickname, don't you? The Galloping Major.
Yeah, and because again, I suppose when you're looking, we call him Puskas because we played against him, and you'd say Keegan, you'd say
Yeah,
whoever, wouldn't you? But them Hungarian players, they all called him Uchi because that was his nickname, Uchi.
yeah,
which means little brother in Hungarian, and he was so instrumental in the development of Hungary, because he was almost the go-between with the Soviet iron fist that run the Hungarians, and he done so many things for that group of brothers, of players, and it was so sad really when you look at what happened to them, and it's a shame that they wasn't allowed to play with freedom. And as I've read that book and as I've looked at things about Puskás, they reckon that the only person that was free in Hungary in those days was Ferenc Puskás.
Yeah, because I've just had a thought as well.
Yeah.
You said I got that mixed up with Red Banner. Honved were the army team, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
And he was a major, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was galloping major.
He got the rank of major. Yeah.
I mean, when we say major, I mean, there's no evidence that he actually was in the army partaking in activities with guns. They were just pretty much taken over.
Yeah.
In fact, the only Hungarian that bore arms and took a gun out on the streets was Seaboard, because in October I think they were due to play Sweden, and the game was called off and they were coming back. Word had got out that Puskás had been killed, and then he's come over the border and come back into Hungary. All the players were told to go home and just keep their heads down. Well, Seaboard, he was the rebel. He hated the Russians and the communists. He took a gun and he went on the streets and he was fighting them.
And the way he shot, he could shoot as well.
Ron, couldn't he just? What a fantastic trip down memory lane, sir. And I think the next one, part 2, we're going to indulge in Jimmy Hogan. We're going to talk more about Jimmy, because I've looked at him and I've researched him and I've gone, you're joking. He actually, when he was out in Dresden, he was coaching Helmut Schön, you know.
Yeah.
When Ireland come over and beat England, I think it was 49, Jimmy Hogan was the manager. When Holland first beat Germany in 1912, Jimmy Hogan was the manager. Somebody asked me today, who's Jimmy Hogan? I said, well, basically, he was the man that taught Europe how to play football.
Manager of the Villa, manager of Chelsea.
He was, yes, yeah. So we're going to indulge in Uncle Jimmy, and because I think it's only right and proper that we should shed light on these legends of yesteryear in football, because sadly these days it's all Premier League and the new players, but without people like Jimmy Hogan, like Ferenc Puskás, like the Hungarians, players of today haven't got the influences.
That's correct.
So till next time, sir, can I thank you so much? And we're both going to go down now and watch the Villa and watch one of the modern day Mavericks and great players, Jack Grealish, tear it up and get 3 points for the Villa boys.
Hopefully, because he is starting to look a little bit nervous at the moment.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah. But there you go. Okay then.
Cheers, Ron.
Cheers.
Till next time. Thanks, pal.
Bye.
Bye-bye then. Bye-bye.
Thank you.